I'm back again.
Hi.
Hi. So with your
It's 6 o'clock.
oh um I was going to ask with your um clinical years, do you have to go through a formal assessment every semester as well?
Yeah, so there is. It depends on the medical school you go to. For us at HMS, every single rotation that we complete, we have to take what we call a shelf examination, which is the standardized test by the National sort of Board of Medical Examiners. And you have to get a passing score on that to then progress onto sort of your next rotation. But I think at HMS, we're also a school that does it in a very special way. You need to get above a fifth percentile to pass, and if you don't pass, then you can actually also retake the examination. There's no real sort of consequences. But at schools such as Yale Medical School, they don't have the shelf examination at all. So you don't take shelves. You just go through your entire rotation year, and then you take step one. Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead and start this.
All right. Sounds good.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Nazir Abdul Salam. I'm a student at Columbia, and I volunteer for Project Access as a Columbia campus officer. The essence of today's webinar is to provide an in-depth um, session to the U.S. medical school application process and just enlighten prospective applicants on what they can expect. And I have with me here a very distinguished guest whom I would allow him to introduce himself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Azan Virji. I am a second year medical student at Harvard Medical School. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Mwanza, Tanzania, which is where I grew up. I spent 18 years of my life there, went to high school there. And then I applied to colleges, mostly here in the United States, predominantly because of the generous financial aid packages that were being offered. I got accepted to Yale College. I went to Yale for my undergrad. I applied to a BS MPH degree that Yale has. It's a very specialized degree track that allows you to get your bachelor's in science as well as a master's in public health simultaneously in 5 years instead of the regular 4 + 2 years instead of the regular 6. So that's what I decided to do. Before I sort of finished my degree at Yale, so the bachelor's and the master's, I took a gap year. During that gap year, I did some research in Uganda. I worked for the World Health Organization in the Global Malaria Program for almost 2 months. And then I also did some consulting with Dalberg for 6 months before coming back, finishing my master's in public health. I then applied to medical school, got into Harvard Medical School, and also recently got into Harvard Business School. So I will be graduating with an MD, MBA from Harvard Medical School and Harvard Business School in 2024. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also want to talk about Project Access, which is the nonprofit that I volunteer for. Project Access is headquartered in the UK, and we bridge the access gap to top universities in the US and the UK. And we provide mentorship to students from underprivileged backgrounds to gain access into the application processes to top US and UK colleges. So we have over 160 team members. We have over 3,000 students that we've helped. And if you need any type of mentorship program, any type of mentorship applying to schools in the US, you should get in touch with us. I will share our contact information by the end of this webinar. And so I'll again hand it over to Azan to talk about F1 doctors. And
Sure. Thanks, Nazir.
yes,
Let me see. Let me try to share my screen. All right. Can you see that?
yes.
Great. So F1 Doctors would love to share a little bit about this platform that I started. It's a free online mentorship platform. So it's basically to help international non-US citizens who are currently in college here in the United States apply to medical schools or health professional schools in general. So medical school, dental school, PA schools, DO schools, here particularly in the United States. So that's basically what we do. We provide free mentorship. So at any point, if you want to speak to a mentor about sort of the process, if you have any questions about what it's like to apply, all you have to do is go onto our website and fill out a form, and that form sends an email directly to that mentor that you have specifically chosen. We encourage you to pick a mentor that you think will best suit your needs and best be able to answer some of your questions. So for example, in my case, I'm from Tanzania, so I reach out to a mentor who is also from Tanzania, who would also understand the background I'm coming from. And we can also share sort of commonalities about what it's like to grow up in Tanzania. And when you send them that email, they should respond to you, and hopefully that allows you a chance to connect with them, ask them any questions, to create more of a longitudinal relationship. If you would like them to read some of your application materials, then you can also ask them to do so. It's entirely up to them. If they have the time to do it, then great. If they don't, because they're all volunteering their time to help students like yourself who are international, then then don't take it personally. Just try to find another mentor who will be able to help you with that. So on our website, which is www.f1doctor.com, we also have resources to help you apply as an international student. So where can you find loans? Which medical schools can you apply to as a non-US citizen? Which medical schools will give you financial aid as a non-US citizen as well? So feel free to check out our resources pages as well. So overall, we've only been around for a year, but we have over 100 mentors. That should say 100 mentors, and they're from over 35 different countries. So we've really grown exponentially over the past year, simply because there's nothing like this that really exists out there. You'd be surprised every single time we talk about F1 doctors, everyone is usually taken aback by the fact that there's so many international students at US health professional schools in the US. And that's sort of the core reason as to why we started this, because we wanted to showcase the fact that we exist, we're out here, we're all in health professional schools, we're getting our degrees, and we've been through the whole process. So feel free to reach out to us with anything that you need.
Thanks, Azan. Yes, so we'll get to the business of today. First of all, I want to start with talking about how a student can know if medical school is right for them. We know that medicine is a prestigious field of study area. We know that doctors are highly respected, and we know that especially given the COVID crisis, we know how much valuable healthcare workers and doctors specifically have been to the whole world. Now, if a student says that the reason I want to study medicine is because I'm passionate about it, is that alone enough? And having been through the medical school application system and being a medical student, would you say that passion alone is enough for a student to be able to commit to the MD program?
Yeah, so This is actually a great question because I'm going to start this question with a controversial answer, which is great. That's the best way to start any sort of webinar. I genuinely believe that passion is enough. And here's why. I believe that if you truly have a drive, if you have a motivation that is taking you to medical school, whether it's to help individuals out or it's to contribute to research and to scientific knowledge, whatever that true passion is that's driving you to medical school, I believe that if you stick to it and you really hold on to it, that should be enough, right? If you find yourself in a situation where you don't understand a particular concept or you don't know the answer to a question, even when you are a doctor and you haven't learned it, you still have that passion that will continue to drive you to look up the answer, to find out what is going on with your patient because you are motivated to help them. And I think that if you have this true passion, it should be able to take you very far in the medical career. Granted, that obviously comes with some clauses. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of material. You may even find that the sight of blood makes you a little bit queasy. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, if you have that inner drive, you will continue to push yourself and you will overcome that fear of blood. You will overcome sort of the social component and the mental challenges that come with going to medical school. And you will overcome the sort of the physical challenges as well and how tiring it is because you have that inner drive. And I think that's sort of the most important thing when applying.
Okay, so you mentioned that passion alone is enough. So where every applicant is saying that I'm passionate about medicine, I want to help people, where every applicant is saying that in their application or their interview, what sets a candidate apart, or why should an admissions officer give you special consideration? And how do you justify your passion for knowledge or for service to mankind?
That's a great follow-up question. I think it's how your passion manifests in your application is going to be pretty evident, right? It's going to be clear to an admissions officer that if you truly are passionate about Alzheimer's disease because there's something driving you, let's say that you have a family member who has succumbed to the disease. So you are truly passionate about understanding it, about treating it, about helping other patients who have a similar ailment. That will come through in your application. That will come through in the story that you share in your personal statement. That will come through in the experiences that you do. If you spend a whole summer researching the disease, if you work in an Alzheimer's clinic that supports patients, or you work with the families of members who have Alzheimer's disorder to help them get through this whole time with their family member not being able to recognize them. If you put in the effort, and if that passion manifests into actual experiences, then I think that that will be pretty evident to an admissions officer and it will make you stand out in your application process.
All right, well said. Okay, now let's talk about the materials you need to apply. And from your involvement with F1 doctors, you mentioned earlier on that you have students from different medical schools. And so does every medical school have a different set of application requirements, or is there a common app to all US medical schools? Yeah.
Right. So in general, when you look at the information that's provided by every single medical school, stating what they need for you to have beforehand before you apply to the medical school, there's a commonality that exists. In general, all medical schools will require you to have a core set of classes that you should have taken. They want some biology, they want some chemistry, they want some physics, and they want some math. That's sort of the general that every sort of school requires you to have. And then there's some exceptions. So some schools might require you to have a writing class that demonstrates that you're capable of writing, which is something that's very important, or that's a growing field in the medical community, is being able to present your information to the general public. some schools may also require you to have a social science class where you learn about the different social determinants of health, for example. Some schools may require you to do psychiatry or psychology as one of the courses that you need to apply to medical school. So it truly does vary, but in general, there's a core set of classes that every student should take before applying to medical school.
All right, thanks. And in terms of stats, GPA, transcripts, recommendation letters, which one do you think matters most? Like if an application got to an admissions officer, what do you think? I know you're not an admissions officer, but what do you think would make a student's chances of being called for an interview very high?
Right. So I think it truly does vary based on medical schools. There's some medical schools that definitely do prioritize your numbers and your statistics that you apply with, your GPA or your test scores. But a lot of the medical schools have now started to transition to what they call a holistic application process. And basically what that means is that they're going to look at your application as a whole. So every single thing that you apply with will be considered. And what that also means is that your GPA and your test scores are just as important as your personal statement, or as just as important as the extracurriculars that you do, are just as important as your research. All of it matters. And they will look through all of it, and then they will make a decision based on all the things that you apply with. And what that does is that it does allow a little bit of room for students to thrive in a particular area that they are strongest in. So if you truly are somebody who loves to do research and you do significantly more research and a little less clinical shadowing, that's okay, because then the medical school will look at you and say, you know, this is something that someone has expressed interest in. They really love doing research, and that's a big part of their application. And so we're going to weigh that more heavily than the fact that they haven't done as much clinical shadowing, and that's okay. So it truly does vary from schools, but in general, they're all moving towards this holistic admission process.
Mhm. And I can see how they would use a holistic approach, because for a candidate to have a pretty good score on the MCAT and a significantly high GPA, it only goes to tell how disciplined they are as a student. And I think it cuts across in other disciplines as well. But in your experience, do you think that high test scores, and I'm asking this with the presumption that you do not know the scores that your classmates came to Harvard with, but do you think that high scores on GPA and MCAT necessarily translates into doing well in high school?
I personally don't think so. And the reason I say that is because a lot of these tests are standardized tests, right? So after a certain point, you get good at not necessarily knowing all the information, but you get good at doing a standardized test. The standardized tests basically test your ability to read a question very quickly and then cross off certain answers and then pick the best one, right? So you may be a student who doesn't really thrive in that setting. And I speak to this, you know, very personally as well. I'm also somebody who doesn't really thrive in standardized tests. It's not something that I'm good at. You know, I grew up in Tanzania where a lot of our examinations were based on written answers. So I did chemistry, I did organic chemistry, and most of the exam was, you know, writing a description, writing a paragraph as to what you think is going on in this particular experiment. So that's the background I come from. So when I came here to the US, and I found you have to do the SAT or ACT to apply to college, or you have to do the MCAT to apply to medical school, it's not something that I personally found very easy to do. I actually struggle with that. So I genuinely don't think that standardized tests are an accurate measure of how well you do in high school, or even how smart or intelligent you are, or how good of a candidate you will make in medical school. And I can say that with accurate confidence because I am here, and I am here as someone who doesn't thrive at standardized tests, but I still learn a lot of the material in medical school, and I still absorb it And if you were to ask me personally a one-on-one what the answer to a particular question was, I could give you 5 different answers. But when you put it on a multiple choice test, I'm struggling. So that's sort of my take on it.
All right. And do you know of any COVID-induced adjustments to the application to medical schools this year?
So in terms of how it's changed the application process, I think the biggest change is that a lot of the interviews this year have been virtual. And if you're someone who doesn't fully feel comfortable talking to someone over the computer and may find yourself being a little self-conscious because you may talk over someone or over your interviewer, that's hard. That's challenging to be in that environment and to apply to medical school when you don't really have the ability to shine and you don't have the ability to share your true communication skills. So I think that's sort of been the biggest change to the application process. I think medical schools have also been a little bit more lenient, particularly when it comes to the experiences that you said that you were going to have. So a lot of internships got canceled. A lot of plans to go study abroad also may have changed. And I think medical schools have taken the fact that it is a global pandemic into consideration when applying. But all you have to really do, I think, is just be honest with your situation. Say that I had this internship at this great place and I was going to do research here, but it got canceled because of the pandemic. And then what did you do with your free time? How did you make the most of it? Did you sign up to volunteer to call individuals to ask if they had COVID-19 symptoms? Or did you sign up to help with administering vaccines? Did you use your time wisely, given the fact that the global pandemic interrupted your plans? So I think those are sort of the big changes, in my opinion, that have happened during this global pandemic.
All right, thank you. I see some questions in the chat. We will come to a Q&A session. Please keep them coming. And yeah, we'll address them as we go through the webinar. So now I want to ask about your personal experiences. Do you think that the current application system, I know we just talked about COVID and how that has changed the application to medical school. I also learned that test dates have been flexible now. But at the time that you applied, did you have any mentor? And what was going through your mind as an international student?
Yeah. So I did have multiple mentors. And I think if you are going to get through this process, you need to have people who are on your team. You need to have people who will answer your questions, who will support you, who will be your hype people and hype you up based on the experiences that you're applying to. I think that is the only way you get through this long process while also maintaining your sanity, truly, because it's a marathon. It really is. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I had multiple mentors. The one story that I love to share that I've also shared on F1 Doctors is that when I first came to college, I knew I wanted to be a doctor, even in high school, but I knew that the path to go to medical school as an international student was pretty convoluted. And there were a lot of steps that I had to take to get to that point. And so what I did was actually reached out to a senior when I was a freshman, and I said, hey, I want to go to medical school. And this senior also was an international student who also wanted to go to medical school. So he actually sat down with me in Starbucks on a Saturday, and I distinctly remember this. And we sat at a table together, and I brought my laptop, and we went through my entire 4 years of college. And he said to me, okay, let's just plan it all out. As an international student, that's something that you have to do is plan. You have to plan way in advance because you do not have the flexibility to say, I'm just going to go home, right? I'm just going to go home to my parents' house in Virginia and spend the summer there, right? Because a lot of your ability to stay in this country, a lot of your ability to work requires applications way in advance, right? So if you want to work over the summer, you need to apply way in advance to get the sort of the federal approval to do a summer internship. So he planned out my entire 4 years with me in terms of what classes I was going to take, which years I would do research. He also shared other opportunities that international students do at Yale College, for example, studying abroad during the summer. And he provided all of these resources to me. And then I went home with that. And that was a document that I looked for guidance to throughout my entire 4 years, right? It changed over time. Yes, I didn't take chemistry one semester and pushed it off to another semester, but at the end of the day, that was sort of my guiding document that I used to decide what I still needed to do. What are the things that I needed to check off my list before I sent in my application to medical school? And that is sort of my big takeaway lesson for other international students applying, is that plan way in advance. Plan what you're going to be doing next summer and the summer after that. If you're missing clinical shadowing, include that in one of your summers or in one of your vacation days. Whatever you need to do to send in your final application, make sure you're ticking off all those boxes as you go along. So that's sort of my big takeaway.
Okay. And looking back now, what do you wish you knew at the time that you were applying? And how, what part of your application do you think was your strongest there?
Yeah. So when I look back, I think that the biggest mistake I made was I did not chart my own path to medical school. So in my freshman and sophomore year of college, I saw other pre-meds, and I used to hang out with them. I had a lot of friends who were also pre-med, and each and every single one of them did different things. And as somebody who was international, who also wanted to go to medical school, who knew that it was an uphill battle, I was a little bit insecure as to what I needed to do to get to medical school. So I basically watched them, and I saw that one of them would apply to be in leadership positions in all of these extracurriculars, right? And I thought, well, I guess that's the way somebody gets to medical school, is by having all these leadership positions on your resume. So I decided to follow suit. I also applied to these leadership positions. I worked in it. I was a member of like 4 or 5 different organizations on campus. And it was only in my junior year that I realized that was all fluff, really, at the end of the day. That was somebody else's path to medical school, but it was not mine. It was not unique. It was not authentic. And that is when I decided to take a step back in my junior year and say, what do I truly care about? What is at the core of my application? What can you say about me? And I realized I am, in one sentence, a student from Tanzania who's really passionate or interested in infectious diseases, because I grew up around a lot of malaria in Tanzania. That was it. And so I said to myself, if that is who I am at its core, how do I showcase that in my application? So I dropped all my extracurriculars that weren't really meaningful, and I decided to just focus in on the things that I thought were meaningful. So I focused in on research and spent a lot more time on research on malaria pathogens. I also decided that I wanted to get an MPH, right? And I wanted to tie in that public health knowledge into my experience of going to medical school. And so I decided to apply to that program. And that, I think, is the biggest lesson here, is that you truly just have to be authentic. Chart your own path. What are you truly passionate about? What is your story? And then making sure that comes across in the application and the experiences that you do. And if you sort of, your follow-up question was, what I think is the strongest part of my application? I think that's it. It's the story, it's the uniqueness, it's the authenticity. It's the fact that I realized that I am interested in infectious diseases, and I'm not going to do all of these other things that I see other medical students or pre-meds doing. I am going to focus in on the things that make me who I am and stay true to my story. So the research, working at the World Health Organization in the Global Malaria Program, because I was passionate about solving the malaria crisis, and working in consulting as well. That's something I decided to do on my own because I wanted to sort of experience that field and see how it tied in to healthcare. And all of these experiences I picked out on my own after sitting down and doing the research because they all aligned with my story. So I think that's what I would say in answer to answer your question.
Well, thank you very much. So I want us now to talk about the application. The the main application, I want us to talk about general notes to keep in mind during the application. And I know that the application may have changed from the time that you applied, especially due to COVID. I also want to talk about common errors that you can think about that could potentially hurt candidates' chances. And also, again, just getting your application to stand out. And I know you talked about being authentic and getting that across in your application, that in your personal statement, and I believe that is through the personal statement that they get to see you as a person and the things that you care about. So that said, how do you make sure that your personal statement is memorable even after the admissions officer has read through 2,000 applicants?
Right. Yeah. So that's absolutely true. You definitely have to find a way to stand out. And as you can imagine, that's really challenging after an admissions officer has read 2,000 applications. Um, but honestly, you'd be surprised, right? You'd be surprised as to how different you are from every other candidate because everyone truly, like I mentioned, has their own path, has their own journey, but also has their own interests, right? You may have two candidates who are both interested in Alzheimer's disease, but one of them is also really passionate about singing and joined a singing group. And did that all throughout college. And you may have the other person who really cared about volunteering and giving back to the community, so worked at a soup kitchen. And what you'll find is that both of those students may also be admitted to the medical school because even though they are interested in sort of the same thing, they bring very diverse perspectives. Someone who's been on a singing team or been on a sports team or worked at a homeless shelter to provide food to individuals in the local community, each one of them brings their own perspective to the field of medicine. And so that's something that you have to remember is that you think that you're the same as every other candidate, but in reality you're probably not. And I think that also means that you should do all the extracurriculars that you want to do, right? Don't feel that each and every single one of them has to be tied to the field of medicine. If you want to sing, if you want to play a sport, that's okay, right? That's what makes you different from the next candidate. So that's, I think, one way to stand out is to do the things outside of medicine as well that you're passionate about. The other way to, in terms of the second question, in terms of common errors that you should try to avoid, the simple things include, just spell check your application, all of your answers, ask a friend to read it, ask a family relative to read it, ask your writing tutors at the college that you're at to also read it. All of it, right? You want to make sure you avoid just a simple spelling error that could really taint the view of that admissions officer has of your application, right? The other thing that I think is a big pitfall is don't put something on your resume or on your application that didn't really happen, right? Or don't over exaggerate an experience. If you said that, you worked at a homeless shelter every Saturday, don't say that it was, every single day of the week. And don't say that you put in more hours than you actually did, because at the end of the day, the admissions officers will be able to tell that, this doesn't really line up, right? Don't make any lies or any sort of alternative facts on your application, because they will truly be able to see through that. So I think that's also really important to remember.
Yes, and to add to the common errors that you talked about, I have read that a fairly common, yet kind of silly mistake that applicants can make is when we apply to different schools, assuming we apply to a candidate is applying to 5 different schools for the same program, and they write out one essay, and then they use the name of one school. And then in submitting it to the other schools, they forget to change the name of the school that they applied to. And it seems like nobody should make this mistake, but I've heard that it happens so frequently.
It really does. You're absolutely right. It happens more frequently than you think. And the lesson there is to do your research about the specific school that you're applying to, right? If you have an entire application that's based on how passionate you are on global health, if you're going to apply to a medical school that doesn't teach global health or doesn't have a global health department, right? Like that's a waste of application fees, because that school is going to look at your application, and while they may want you to still attend because you provide that perspective, they may also feel that they have nothing to really offer you if that's the path that you want to take. So make sure you research the school that you're looking up. When you're writing your secondary applications that need to be submitted to each and every single school, like you mentioned, don't leave the name of a prior school on your application, but also look up some of the programs that they have, right? If Harvard Medical School is offering a master's in healthcare delivery at the School of Public Health, and that's something that you're interested in, share that on your application and say, look, I've done my research. This is something I'm passionate about, and I know that you offer something that would suit my needs, right? Tell them why they want you. Show them why you want them just as much, and show them also simultaneously how much they should want you as well. So I think that's something to remember.
All right. So I want us to talk about an interview. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if at the time that you applied, group interviews were used for the Harvard admissions processes. But in an interview, I wanted to talk about some of the questions that you were asked in your interview. And with respect to group interviews, if which are usually the preliminary interviews. So assuming they invite 5 candidates at a time for an interview, how do you not get lost in the group interview? How do you make your voice heard and at the same time still do not feel like do not come across as hijacking the interview and talking over everyone else?
Right. So I unfortunately did not have any group interviews during my admission cycle. Most of my interviews were all one-on-one, with either a student or an admissions officer or a faculty member. So those were all my interviews. And in those situations, the questions that they ask you, it varies based on who you get as an interviewer. Some medical schools have started to do standardized interview questions as well, so that each interviewer that you get will be asking the same question to everyone. And they just want to see how well you respond, and they want to standardize that process. And some medical schools have started doing that. And I think that's really great because everyone gets the same question. If it really doesn't matter if you have a better relationship and start talking about sports with one, faculty member or one interviewer, compared to someone else who may not connect with their interviewer, because everyone's being asked the same questions and you have to come up with a decent response to that question. So some schools are starting to do that. Other schools still have, still give the freedom to the interviewer to ask any question that they see fit. So a lot of my interviews, the people asked me questions about my resume, about my background, about what it was like coming here to the US and going to college here and now applying to medical school here, also what I want to do in the future. So, it truly does vary, and there's so much variety based on the interview that you get. In terms of the group interviews, I think my advice for that is it's really just a balance, right? You have to sort of read the room, and I think that comes with practice. You should practice with your friends as well, in the sense that definitely don't want to be the person who's speaking the most and sort of like trying to take control of the entire conversation. But at the same time, you also don't want to be the person who just sits in the back and nods their head, right? It's finding that balance. It's finding the right time to speak, It's making sure that the point that you're making is actually sort of advancing the conversation forward. It's a unique point. You're not just repeating what someone else has said. It's truly just a skill that, you have to get better at. And I think, a lot of us, it comes to us naturally. If you have friends and you're in a group conversation, the same sort of thing, the same sort of dynamic applies, right? Is that you want to be that one person who shares their story during the conversation, but you also don't want to be the one that's only sharing their story, right? So it's just that the small thing to remember, and not to take it too seriously. Just think of it as a conversation amongst friends. We're meeting each other for the very first time, and you want to find a moment to share your story and your insights, but also not dominate the conversation.
All right, thank you for that. So now I want us to talk about medical school realities, and this in connection to the first question that I asked, is passion alone enough for a person to apply to medical school? And I asked that because many students or many applicants will they say, I want to go to medical school because I want to help people, but then they don't realize the realities that come with being a medical student. So please paint a vivid picture for us of what life is like in the first or and the versus the final years. What a typical day looks like in the life of a first year Harvard medical student, or medical students across the board, since you have students from other schools on your F1 Doctors team as well. Please talk about stress culture, and then we'll talk about graduation related anxieties, whether medical students feel that as well.
Yeah. Um, so a vivid picture is what you asked for, is what you will get. So I am currently doing my clinical year. So at Harvard Medical School, you start your clinical year in your second year. And so I wake up every single day. My alarm goes off at 3:45 a.m. And that wakes me up. I start off my day with prayer. I pray when I first wake up, but I also like the couple of extra minutes of sleep because I think it will make a difference. So I go back to sleep. And then my final alarm goes off at 4. So I wake up at 4 a.m. I grab some breakfast. I'm currently on my OB-GYN rotation on gynecological oncology is what I'm on currently. And so at 4 a.m., I go grab some breakfast, sit at my computer, and I start reading up on the patients that we have for that day. So a lot of gyn-onc is surgical. And so I read up on the patients who are going to get surgery for that day, but I also read up on the patients who I did surgery on yesterday and how they're doing today, so I can present on that. I leave my house at around 4:45. I bike to the hospital and I get there at around 5. Sometimes I'm a little late, 5:15 max. And then rounds start at 5:30 in the morning. So what that means is that me and my team go around to each and every single patient who got surgery yesterday to check up on them, how their wound is doing, have they spiked a fever? Are they breathing okay? All of that. So that usually ends around 7 a.m. So from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., you usually just have a little bit of downtime with the team. But right after, then you start getting ready for the OR cases and for the surgical cases that are happening. So I am in surgery. Some surgeries last for 2 hours. Some surgeries go up to 6 hours or 7 hours, and you're just basically standing there. As a medical student, what you really can do varies. So sometimes I'm sort of manipulating or using my hands to make the surgeon's job a little bit easier. Sometimes I get the chance to, close up the incision at the end of the surgery. So that's usually great. But I get home anywhere between 5 to 7 p.m. I have dinner and I have to start studying, because at the end of every rotation, I have a national examination called the shelf exam that I need to take. So I have to start studying. I have to read, do a ton of work, but I also make sure that I have time to decompress. So while I'm eating dinner, I'll often watch an episode of TV. and then start studying. So it's hard, right? I think every medical student will agree with me when I say that it is physically, emotionally, mentally draining. Um, but like you mentioned, it's your passion that gets you through it, right? Every single day I wake up, I am excited to go into the hospital because I learn something new every day. And that's one thing that, makes me who I am, is I just love learning. I just love learning about anything. If you will teach me something new, I will sit down and listen to you talk for hours, right? And so every day I learn something new, and that's my passion. That's what drives me, right? The other thing is I am driven by the fact that I want to make an impact in the lives of the individuals that I grew up with in Tanzania. So whether it means going back to Tanzania to train other doctors or to help health systems grow and actually reach individuals in rural areas, that's something that I want to do. That drives me every single day to get out of bed. And if you have that thing that is driving you, that will continue to push you, I think, you will get through some of these challenging years. And then my final years at HMS are very different. Your last few years at Harvard Medical School are sort of unstructured time where it allows you to do really whatever you see fit to make your application the strongest to residency. So every student has to do another rotation in medicine to perfect their skills in the field of internal medicine. But you can also do an elective in OB-GYN if you're going to be applying to OB-GYN residency. You can take certain classes that you're interested in. So some of them, for example, are understanding trauma and surgery in sports. So if you are really interested in doing surgery in the world of sports, there's a whole class on that, and you learn about it. And it allows you to really explore your passions and to really chart out your own path here at Harvard Medical School. So I think my next 2 years are going to be a little bit easier than they are right now, but I hope that gives you a good picture of what it's like.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And we'll talk about the residency program very shortly, but I want to know what your perspective is on graduation-related anxiety. I mean, your interactions with students who are coming out this year, how do they feel? I know from my interaction with Columbia University students and other seniors from other colleges as well, many feel very anxious about the COVID related job, job situation. And is that something that medical students go through as well, given that there is an assumption of job security and job assurance once you're out of school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone goes through that anxiety after they graduate, regardless of where they're from, and particularly international students. They often go through a lot of that. There's always going to be a situation where you may not match after graduating with your MD, but I think that what people have realized is that there's still so much more that you can do with your MD degree, even after graduating, even if you don't match that year, right? So what you've seen is individuals who don't match, they often take a research year. And so they do some research, publish some papers so that they can really boost their application to residency. Other students decide to take an entirely different path. And what you'll come to realize is you can do so much more with your MD as well. You can be a doctor and work in a hospital, but also you can work in the field of business. You can do venture capitalism. You can do consulting. You can do really anything that you please, right? I think that people have this idea that if you graduate with your MD, you have to work in a hospital as a doctor. If that was your initial goal and that's what brought you to medical school, but in medical school you started to explore other things and realize that maybe that's not what you're truly interested in, that's totally okay, right? I think this year at Harvard Medical School we had somebody who matched into starting their own company. So that's something that they always wanted to do. They wanted to start a biotech company, and after they graduated, they didn't apply to residency. They just started their own company, or they worked in it. Some students also match in pharmaceuticals because they want to, be in that environment. You truly have to just realize that the world is your oyster with your MD. If you still want to go to medical school and you don't match to residency, there are options there. But if you realize that going to residency is not what you truly want to do, then that's totally okay as well. Um, so I think that anxiety always exists. Specifically for international students, there's the challenge of finding a residency program that may sponsor your work visa. That's always going to be challenging as a non-US citizen. You're going to be limited in the number of residency positions that you can apply to as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But as an international student, you also have the ability to practice elsewhere. If you have an MD from a US medical school, you have the knowledge and you have the education, so you can also practice elsewhere if that's something that you want to do. If you really are interested in global health, maybe that's something you can consider as well. So I think there's a lot of options, and the anxiety is going to be there for everyone, but it's important to take a step back and realize that there's always a way for whatever you really want to do.
All right, thank you, Azan. I will come to the Q&A very soon. We have just one more slide to go through. And in our last 10 minutes, I want us to, before we go to the Q&A, talk about the realities of the school. So you've talked a lot about residency programs. For anyone that's wondering, what's a residency program? Is it guaranteed for every student? What are some challenges that can arise during residency?
Yeah, so to elaborate on my last answer as well, a residency program is basically where after your MD, you work in a hospital for a certain number of years so that you can get your license and you can practice in that field. So for example, if you are interested in OB-GYN, there are OB-GYN residencies all across the US at hospitals, and they're usually 4 years long. So you apply to an OB-GYN residency, and during that time, you're working as a resident. So you're working under what we refer to as an attending. So somebody who has gone through medical school and a residency, that's who you're working under. And you basically see all the patients, you still write the prescriptions, but you just have this person who reads over every note that you write and reads over every prescription that you send. And it's basically, think of it as like a training where you're still working under someone, but it allows you to hone in on your skills. It allows you to see more patients. It allows you to truly be the best doctor that you can possibly be, so that when you do graduate from your residency, that's when you get your license. And that is when you can also train other individuals who come after you. So that's sort of what the residency program is. Every single medical school across the world has their own sort of version of that. Some call it an internship after, but that's sort of at the core of it. It just is a limited amount of time where you practice under someone and hone in on some of your skills. And is it guaranteed for every student? And the answer is no, unfortunately. So in the US, the number of residency spots is not equal to the number of students who are graduating from medical school every single year. So as you can imagine, there's going to be some students who graduate from medical school with an MD who don't get into residency. There's also the other path that some students decide to take, is that some students go to medical school in their own home countries, if they're international, and then apply to residency programs here in the US. And we call those individuals international medical graduates. So that's also a path that other people can take, and that's also not guaranteed. Even if you've done your medical school in a different country, it doesn't mean that you will get a residency spot here in the US, because it is really competitive, which is why a lot of students decide to take an extra year after medical school to do research, or make sure that they have the right experiences for the program that they're applying to, so that they stand a better shot of getting into that program. So that's something to consider. It's definitely a big challenge in the US medical system. But hopefully, I hope that it improves in the next few years. And so some of the challenges that arise during residency is that, you know, I feel like I am physically tired, but residents are significantly more physically tired than I am. As a resident, you are working a lot more hours. So you not only are fully responsible for the patient and for their care, but also in some residency programs, you have to work night shifts. You have to work on the weekend, and that's just a reality that you have to get used to. It's only when you're in attending and you've completed your residency where you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of your time and when you decide to work. You could decide to work only at nights. Or you could decide to only work during the week and not during the weekend. You have a lot more flexibility in that sense, but as a resident, a lot of your schedule is really dictated by the hospital that you're working at. So it's definitely tough. But at the end of the day, the learning curve is greatest during residency and also during medical school. But during residency, you see such a wide range of patients, all with different diseases, all with different drugs that they need to be given. You truly learn the most during that period of your life, of your education, so that when you are an attending, you've seen so many patients at that point that you really truly are able to apply it to any new patient that walks in. So I think that should cover the entire process and what residency is like.
All right, and now we are at our Q&A session. And here is my contact information and that of Azan's. Please feel free to get in touch with any of us if you have any questions. I will now stop sharing and then open the Q&A session. So, okay. Ain wants to know what type of extracurriculars were you involved in as an undergrad, and how did you plan your gap year effectively?
Yeah, so the extracurriculars that I did was I sang in a choral group in the Yale Russian course. I did that for a year and a half. Basically, went on tour with this group of guys and sang at churches on the West Coast. So we went on tour. We learned Russian Slavic music, and we all sang together. It was beautiful. So like I mentioned, stuff outside of medicine. The other extracurriculars that I did was I was also part of the Yale College Council. Something that I truly valued was being able to create change at the level of the campus. So even if it's a small change, it truly does make a big impact on the lives of some of the students. So one of the projects I worked on was trying to make transcripts that you had to request formally and that had to be mailed, trying to request or trying to ask the administration to provide e-transcripts or online transcripts that students can usually download onto their computers, see their progress, also send it to employers as an unofficial transcript as well. So that's something that I also worked on during my time in college. And then in terms of planning my gap year, it took a lot of meticulous planning, honestly. It took a lot of emails, first of all. Getting my internships was not as easy as just applying online. A lot of them required sending emails to individuals. So sending emails to a research mentor and saying, hey, I'm really interested in the work that your lab is doing. This is my experience. Can I work in your lab? Most of the time for free, because I am a college student and you don't have to pay me. Which is not entirely ethical and shouldn't happen, but I think as someone who was just starting off, that's something that I had to do to really gain that experience. So I sent a lot of emails. I planned it so that it would work out in terms of timing wise. I realized that if I wanted to do an internship in the US, I would have to apply for the optional practical training, which is something that all international students have to apply to before they do an internship in the US. And so I realized that maybe I should do internships elsewhere where I don't really have that requirement or that restriction. So working for the World Health Organization and getting an internship there, or going back to Tanzania, which is my home country, and working in a consulting firm for 6 months. Really just exploring all your options that you have available. I think that's sort of how I planned out that year.
So it's 6:59 now. I know you mentioned that you had to leave at 7, but are you able
Yeah.
to squeeze in? Yeah, okay. So someone is asking.
I'm happy to answer one or two more questions, but as I mentioned, my bedtime is 9 p.m. And I have to wake up at 3:45 tomorrow. So
7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Sure. So someone wants to know how you make each school unique when answering secondary essay questions. Many schools offer similar programs and mission statements. So how do you make the application unique in their secondary essays?
Yeah. So I think the questions that you get asked during your secondary applications, they are similar, but they're also very different, right? And you have to find a way to tailor an answer that you have. Let's say you do have a standardized answer, which is okay. We all do it, right? We all reuse answers and send them to the same schools because we don't have time to write 18 different essays if you're applying to 18 different schools. So my recommendation for that is to make sure that you center it around a story, right? So if the question is, how did you demonstrate leadership? Have a story in the back of your mind that really demonstrates a whole lot of different qualities. And then use that experience to answer that one question. So that might make it a little bit easier for you. If you're able to say that I worked for the Yale College Council and I was an elected representative and I spent 2 years on that council, if the question is asking you about leadership, tailor that experience towards that question, right? So I worked on this project independently to try to get access to online transcripts to all the students. But if the question is asking you about community values and how you contribute to the community, tailor that same experience to that question. Say that I truly care about my community at large at the macro level. So, the entire city of Boston, for example, but I also care about my community at the very small micro level. So my Yale College community, I really care about them and I really wanted to make a big impact in their lives, even if it was a really small impact. And one way I did that was by making sure that they had access to online transcripts. Same story, but you're sort of changing the way that you use that story to answer the question. So I think that's sort of the best approach to the secondary applications. And even though a lot of schools have the same mission statement and they ask you, how do you relate to our mission statement? They're still different, right? One school will say a specific word. They will say diversity. And you have to pick on that word and say, this is why I bring diversity to your medical school. One school will say that they really, truly prioritize community. How do you bring or embody community values in your application? And how can you bring those community values to that medical school? So it's really just piecing out, what is different between these medical schools. And yes, they have the same programs, but they also have vastly different programs. You just have to do your research. You just have to keep digging and clicking on one link after another until you find that one thing that really makes them different and unique that applies to you, that you are interested in, that you can talk about.
Thanks for that answer. Brilliantly answered. And a growing trend that I've seen is that diversity that you mentioned. Many schools are using that now in their requirements in scouting for new applicants. And there is a question asking if this would be posted on our YouTube channel. Yes, it would. And I just want to thank Azan so much and all of our participants who tuned into today's session. This has been very helpful. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our participants, have gained an increase in their knowledge about application to US medical schools. So please reach out to Azan or I through the contact information that I shared on the screen earlier on. And thank you so much for attending, everyone. Thank you, Azan.
Thank you all. Good luck.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, Nazir.